How to Rebuild a 4-Bolt Water Pump by Butch Williams.
Hi folks. We're going to first show what to look for in a core if you're looking for cores, if you're examining your own. There's lots of things to go wrong. You can see how the back of this one is eaten up, as is that one. And we'll show you in a minute what causes that. This one here, can you see the crack? Okay. There's another section of the front that's gotten eaten up. That failure is rather obvious. You got these here. This is marginally repairable. That one is actually rather easily repairable. That one there is also very marginal repair. This one here is an easy repair. And like Vonda said, we have to shuffle through them. Okay, this one here has somebody else has gotten in there, and there are ways to try to prevent that. And you can also see the bolt holes are wobbled out. Oh, this one here shows freezing damage. With it installed on the engine like so, water pools in there, and if it's not got antifreeze in it, it'll freeze and break. Split there, split all through the bottom. Now, as far as what causes the wear here and on the back side, in the generator bracket, there's it's called an anti-rotation bracket. And the pin both keeps the generator from spinning, but it also locates it. You can see that in there. That locates the generator front to back on the engine. Then you have a specific length coupler that goes in like so. And now, with that coupler in there and bolted in, and this bolted to the engine, not with that foot, but nevertheless it'd be mounted in, that sets the position of the impeller in the middle of the casting. It gives both good water pump efficiency, but it also keeps the impeller out of the front or back of the casting.
Butch will now tear down the water pump.
Okay, here's a few tools that are pretty handy to have. A 1-inch wrench for the packing nut. You can get by the crescent wrench or a socket, but the better it fits, the more success you'll have without tearing anything apart. The original bolts are 7/16, and for tear down, that pretty much covers most of it. We normally use a bushing driver, but if you don't have one to remove it, you just take a 5/8 coarse thread bolt, sand the threads down so it doesn't tear up the housing, and it will show that can be used to remove the pump. And then, everybody's handed in the hammer. Now, I've done these for like 30 some years and finally got smart enough to build a bracket to hold the pump in the vise. Normally I just patted the jaws and tried to hold and clamp it in by the foot, but you always run the chance of marking putting teeth marks in it, and a remote possibility of breaking an ear off. I've not had that, but I could see it happening. So without further ado, I'm taking sometimes if necessary, you may have to use a little bit of heat. Don't go any hotter than like a propane torch, but if it's seasoned there tight, they can heat the snout a little bit to Also, penetrating oil is your friend, but so is patience. Everybody oils it and then wants to take it out right now. It's called instant gratification. It's also called a junk vice. Obviously, by looking at it, you can tell this mainly serves purpose on my welding bench. If we didn't show a few things going wrong, you wouldn't leave it anyway. So. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Now on the back side, these are being cooperative. If you got one that will not come out, stop. You can take a propane torch and heat the casting a little bit. Propane torch will not, unless you really dwell at it, will not melt the aluminum. If you have an oxyacetylene torch, stay off the casting, but you can heat the bolt bright red hot and hold it that way for a while without melting the bolt head. What it does, heat travels down the shank of the bolt and expands it and crushes the corrosion, and then let it cool off and take it out that way. If you snap one off, there are ways to repair it. We'll explain that, the good way and the bad way, here in a little bit. You take the grease fitting out too, because you're going to want to take and clean the grease passage out. This is where some penetrating oil would be advantageous. Penetrating oil and patience. Neither of which do I have close by. You carefully line the blade up with the slit in back. Now if that's visible or not. Yeah, through the magic of video, we some penetrating oil and a rag appeared. So we put it down in there. Gently try to get it down far enough that it's below the casting. Snug it down, and now you can work it a bit to get the penetrating oil to loosen the packing up against the shaft. If you make a bracket, you ought to deburr it. This part isn't rocket science, it's just nothing more than patience and repetitive motion. What I'm doing is just to not hit the casting. Using a punch on the end of the shaft. Now, something I didn't mention, but to get the packings out, a pick is very advantageous. There's another way about going about it, and I'll probably end up resorting to that. And that's, you just take and dry the bushing out gently, and that will show the packings out ahead of it. And so much for that. Okay, now normally I'll use a bushing driver, but a lot of people don't have that. So you can also take a 5/8 bolt, grind the threads down. The taper helps center it in the bushing to keep it from getting into your housing. A nice neat workspace is advantageous, which I've never had in my life. So you can see the packings are coming out slowly. And this is another thing, if you have a solvent tank, if you throw this, once you get the packing gland out, throw the pump in the solvent tank, that will help soften the packings also and get them loose from what they are right now. They're stuck in the threads, and that you're stripping the packing out of the threads. And this will probably have to go in the solvent tank before it actually finally comes out. It's more intense on staying. So we'll go to the second one. Best to pad the jaws so they don't tear up the back of the casting, which means that your gasket may not seal and you introduce a whole new set of problems. And while you're looking, you can see the extremely worn spot where the packing has been run and wore out the shaft. So, without taking all the time to show all the ugly details, I'm gonna start picking this this packing out. And whoever installed this one, instead of cutting rings, they just roped it, wound it around there, which is not the best way to do it. It's best to take and cut your, as we will show in the reassembly, it's best to cut the packing into rings, seat it, and then do it over and over. You stagger the gaps. If it overlaps, it's not a problem. If there's a gap, it's not a problem either, but obviously you want to keep them as close as you can. This time I'm going to use a bushing driver. It actually works better, but there we are. That one can come out, but if you're not going to if you're not changing it to a heater nipple, there's no reason to remove the plug, because that's also an easy way to crack a casting. Yeah, before we actually get into assembly, I want to show you the difference in some kits. They aren't all the same. This one here, my brother purchased someplace, and as you can see, it's got a steel shaft, which right out of the package was corroded. It's got the rivet in it, but it did not come with an impeller. Also, this is what it came with for packing. There's the bushing it came with. Not drilled, so if you use one like this, you have to install it and drill to make sure that you got a grease hole. This one here came from someplace else, and it came with actually a bit of instructions, at least a drawing. It came with the shaft, which I know these are stainless steel because I know the guy that made a bunch of them, and blades already installed. It came with the bushing that's already been drilled, so all kits are not created equal. So we'll leave it go with that. Another thing is this packing nut, the gland nut, does more than just act as a gland nut. You can see how, maybe the camera can pick up how badly worn this is. This actually also acts as a front. You can see how loose and snappy that is compared to a brand new one. This is actually much tighter. And these are somewhere in between. You can see again the ovaling in that one, and just how floppy that is. And that one there is quite oval. So these are things to pay attention with. If you have one that's already drilled, take a marker, or I found it is easy, take a marker and mark the face of the flange here in line with the hole, and that helps you when you insert it. You can tell whether the hole is lined up. And again, you mark the hole, use it as an alignment point, so that the grease hole will line up. Oh, back up front. Okay, the best way to clean it is bead blasting it. Get everything clean. It doesn't have to be, but the cleaner it is, the easier it is to inspect for defects, and also it's easier to do a better job if it's not filthy. Granted, sometimes you have to do it on short notice, like at a show and it's pouring, antifreeze out. But if you can do it ahead of time and clean it, also when you do it that way, make sure you wash all the beads, sand, and grit out of it, because none of that is conducive for a long-lasting job. See down in there, you can see the mark on the bushing lining up with the grease hole. And means this one has got studs sticking out. I got to kind of set it especially in here. Just carefully tap it down in. You can hear the sound, change of sound when the thing bottoms out. And let's see if we can do this in a orderly fashion. You can see through the bore. You can see the pick sticking out. Now, if you paid attention to how that went in, the very first one I did, I thought that the flange was a thrust bushing for the impeller to run against. I was wrong. I put it in backwards and started putting packing in it, and it just it just kept right on going down. So by having that actually serves as the back of the packing cavity. Now, you always want to lube things before we do that. If you try now, the impeller will not go in. The bushings are undersized, and then as you do them, of course I got ahead of myself, normally try to clean these threads out. We use the right size tap just to clean the threads out. You're not wanting to cut anything, just to get the threads actually clean of packing. It's a really fine thread, so it's a real pain to start, and if you aren't careful, it's real easy to tear the threads out. Get the bushings reamed out so that the shaft will pass. You want it to pass easily but not sloppily. If it's tight, it can actually seize up and cause a lot of problems later on. I have to do this in 2 steps because of the reamers that I have available. If you don't have reamers, there are other ways. You can take a dowel, split it, and put sandpaper around it and run it and drill till it passes. Again, don't ever invest in a $5 vise. Now, typically that starts, but it's still very tight. And this one here is a size that you can't run it all the way through because it will oversize the bushing too badly. The way I prefer to do them is in back on a sun and pin hone machine, but very, very few people have that available. So. You can see now it's quite snug, but it's also not snug enough to cause any problem. And part of it is it feels like there's a slight burr around that hole. It could be sanded off, but in the event of trying to get this accomplished, everybody sees my grease brush. You always lubricate stuff as it goes together. This is a marine or a boat trailer wheel bearing grease. It's quite waterproof. It does not come off of when you wash it. It takes some good detergent. It also doesn't come out of clothes super well, so it ought to be a good project for this one. As mentioned before, it's best not to just take and wrap the packing in one continuous string. So you take and cut it so it is just about that length. It will make a ring. It can be slightly large because the bore is large, obviously. You may find out why they don't let me have anything sharp here in a minute. So now you pack it, a good greasing between each set of rings. You can use a pick, you can use a screwdriver, any number of things to help work it down. Something I found works really well in seating it is a short piece of 1/2-inch conduit. And just keep going until the you don't need to skimp on grease. It'll wipe off, even if it does leave a mess behind. Try to keep the rings, as opposed as you can. Helps if you kind of keep track of where the last one went, which was on this side here. I try to do them about 180 degrees out. If there's a slight gap, it's not a big thing. If there's a slight overlap, it's not a big thing. In this instance, being I already have one, we're going to put a new nut in. That helps it last longer. And now, dandy tool here comes back into play. As you're tightening, you want to take occasionally and spin the shaft just to keep things seated. Starting to stiffen up a little bit, but we may have to find more packing to put in it before this is all done. If it gets too tight, you can always back it off a bit and then work the shaft back and forth to get the packing loosened up. As you can see, the packing nut is disappearing pretty quickly, so we have to scrounge more packing to finish this, and even though it is starting to get fairly snug now, but at this rate it would not seal for long because the packing in that kit was just insufficient for the project. And you don't want to bury the nut all the way down. So that pretty much covers that part. Then the other part is pretty simple. We're just taking, I always try to put something on the gasket. Usually I'll just use the same grease that I'm using. This helps waterproof the gasket a little bit more. It helps keep it from sticking. It also helps prevent some of the seepage and that leads to the corrosion around the back plate. And this one has silver gasket. It has shrunk down some. With that, I will have to go back and get nuts and washers. But then after that, take the grease fitting, which we pulled out. You take and pack that cavity full of grease, put the fitting in, and pump it full of grease. And it's best, if you can, to run it in a drill press, being careful not to take it too far back. But you can pull it forward and run it forward and back a little bit to help break the seals in and distribute the oil, the grease into it. So, does the crowd have any questions? Okay, good. Thank you.